So a lot of you have asked me about this. What is this block map writing, right? And it can be used for a lot of things. It can be used for note taking. I've seen it help a lot of students in university. It could be used for documentation. I've seen it used in various formats and applications in the corporate world. And used for summaries. So, it's a tool for success. And this presentation is sort of on the what and the why of this block map writing. All right. So, well, let's just think of some background before we get totally into it. All right. And I'll start with, the importance of visualization in communication. And there was an MIT study that people process visual information 60,000 times faster than text. I don't know if that's a real number or not, but I know that directionally it's true. People process visual information much faster with text. Why? Because a visual can provide all sorts of context and implications, assumptions, and communication in a very simple image, whereas words are more exact and precise and, in general, are details. All right. Two is what is visual? It's not necessarily a picture or graph. A story is a type of visual, it's a mental picture. So anytime it's easier to see something, visualize something, understand something, it's more effective. And so, what's the implication? Well, stories and graphics improve memory and insight. And that's been proven over and over and over again. In fact, one thing that, in sales, we often teach that people listen to facts through their ears, but trust what they can see and visualize in their minds. Right. So I want to try an experiment. I want you to take out your watch. I want you to time out a minute. And I want you to look at this chart. And I want you to first find the number one, then the number two, then the number three, and see how far you can get in a minute. And I'm going to clock off a minute right here. All right. See how far you can get in a minute. One, and then find the two, and then find the three, and see how far you can get in this minute. And let's go through this exercise and see how we're doing. And we're coming up on about halfway there. So I hope you feel like you're doing well. And I'm wondering if you're doing this, are you feeling a little anxious? You have any, finding any of it difficult? Is it easy to understand? We're three-quarters of the way there. And how are you progressing along here? Hope you're doing well. Hope you feel good about this. Okay, and time is up. And ask yourself, how far did you get? All right, I want to try one more thing with you and do the same exercise. I'm going to give you a minute. And again, first find the number one, the number two, then the number three. And here we go. Now, the number one is in the top left-hand box. Number two is in the second box. Number three is in the third box. And let's see how far you can get in a minute. And I'm counting it off. All right, we're at about 10 seconds now. Have you noticed you feel a little bit more relaxed? Have you noticed it's a little bit easier to understand? A little bit easier to achieve? A little more comfortable? Feeling somewhat more successful? Feeling more capable? We're three-quarters of the way there. Curious how far you've gotten. And again, it's the same exercise. It's the same thing. It's just got some blocks to it to help you understand where the start and where the stop is and where we're transitioning, and we're done. And I'm curious, how many of you got to number 48? And what are the implications of this? We talk and think we've got a lot of clarity on what we're sharing, but we talk in paragraphs and we know exactly what we mean. It's an exact sequence. It's exactly what we meant. It's in an order that makes sense to us. But this is what people hear. But when we organize it and we make it clear, we're now talking about this. Now we're talking about this. You can see how this goes together. We're talking about this. When we block the information, anxieties drop, learning increases, confidence increases, trust increases, understanding increases, and frankly, motivation increases. Let's try another exercise. I want you to stare at the dot in the middle for 20 seconds. I'm counting 20 seconds. I'm going to ask you as you're doing that, do you notice that the colors sort of start disappearing? And there's more and more focus on the dot. And what's the implication here? Our mind, our brain, we're wired to ignore what we perceive as clutter. And what's really important, and get to that quickly. And so what does that mean to communication? Well, we got to cut through clutter. People in business get tons of communication every day. So it's going to be easy to scan. Is this important to me? And if it is, that focus comes in. Is it easy to read? Is it logical? I'm not going to have to go through frustration. So let me work on that instead of something else that looks a little more frustrating. Is it easy to use? Is it keep it simple, stupid? The key things I need, the gold, without the vampires, without the brick walls, without the ghosts that are unneeded, the assumptions. And by the way, is it easy, whether it's an hour later, a week later, a month later, a year later, to go back and find what I need fast as a reference? All right, let's try. So there was this method, the origin, if you Google, it's called the Cornell method. And the Cornell method, it's been adopted at some of the top universities around the world, especially in the United States. It's used in a lot of places. And what's the essence of the Cornell method? Well, at the top, what's the topic? On the left hand, what are the main ideas or the major questions? And to the right are the details, sharing what the main ideas are, or the important dates and places, or the important things to remember, or the information, the sources, where to go back, or diagrams and pictures to that mental picture so you can see how things came together, the formulas. And then a summary of your notes. And it's been proven very, very effective. It's why it's used in, frankly, most of the Ivy League schools. That's the origin, the Cornell method. Then a company came along, two women. We're talking more than 25 years ago, an incredibly successful company called Information Mapping. I ran into them, I guess, early on around 1989, and they were already successful. And who do they market to, and how have they generated millions of dollars in consulting? By essentially taking the Cornell method and applying it to people trying to document quality, creating standard operating procedures. It simplifies it, makes it more readable, more usable. Used a lot in regulatory. They make a ton of money in pharmaceutical industry and electronics industry, places where there's a lot of regulation, so they can document how to avoid risks and how to deal with cost issues and how to deal with records and reporting and submissions. Makes it much easier. Used a lot in HR, right, to simplify policies and procedures and handbooks. Used a ton in manufacturing facilities, the concept in operations to clear guidelines on job expectations and tracking and effectiveness, used a ton in R&D, right, to document developments and processes and programs, and even bid management to document, here's what you asked for, and here's what we've got, and even managing the entire process to keep track of all the stuff. So the primary approach of the Cornell method on steroids, which is what information mapping did, is to frankly decrease document development time and review time, to reduce standard operating training costs, to comply with regulatory documentation requirements, to more efficiently structure complex content, to clearly address multiple audiences with multiple different needs, and frankly, to easily digitize the procedures. And here's the essence of what it looks like. Most documents look like the one on the left. Paragraphs, what we learned in university, what we learned in school, what we learned how to write, and transform it to a visual that makes it easy to find what we need in a logical order, with the information very quickly, and frankly, in one page can summarize what is often in 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, or even more documents, and make them much more concise, much more usable, much more likely to generate action. That's the overall concept. And it's been studied. It was a major study at both Harvard, combined with Columbia University and students, and the effects in the corporate world, whatever. And here's what they found. The use of this mapping concept had significant improvement in results in people, frankly, retrieving information accurately, the information they had, the usage of it, but most effective in initial learning and insight and gain. And what it decreased was the number of questions going to supervisors by 91%. It reduced the time of a quality first draft within the companies and organizations by 83%. It decreased the review time by 75%, the error rates by 54%, the reading time by 51%, and frankly, the number of words by at least 30%. Because the structure is a more logical flow, the usage, it's much more readable, and the navigation, it's faster. And by the way, it's especially helpful, which is where I first found it, in helping people that are dyslexic and have attention deficit disorder. You take industries that have some very bright people that did not do well in an academic environment. And you find a lot of those in a lot of different types of industries, construction especially, which is why I found it. I mean, to do, for example, complex engineering in a building, or complex roofing, which is incredibly difficult as a technology. Most of these people did not do well in school, but absolute brilliant in what they do. And it turns out a lot of them are dyslexic or attention deficit disorder, and traditional writing techniques don't work for them. And that's one of the advantages of this whole mapping concept. For people who don't need it, it doesn't take away. It still works. For people who do need it, it provides a huge advantage. So what is this? Well, it's all about, what's in it for you. And we got two U's. One, the person who wrote it, and two, the person who read it, right? But either way, creates more insight, saves time, reduces hassles, and most importantly, increases action. So what do I mean by that? Well, for the writer, it forces you to really think through for example, if you're reading a book or summarizing a project, what's gold? What's really important and accurate? What are vampires? Happens to be accurate, but it's sucking the blood out of the most important stuff. It's not the highest priority. What are the brick walls? Inaccurate information. What are the ghosts? The assumptions you need to make. And it forces you to think those through. Two, it requires linkage. It forces you to think of what's the cause? What's the effect? It helps you take the chess that you're thinking through all of the complications, but make the complex simple, communicate it in checkers. Helps you organized, unorganized information. And basically, it assures that you've created linkage in what's the context of the situation, what's the action, what's the result, and what's the lessons learned for the future. I call it the Carl principle. It requires flexibility. It makes it easy to include new information as it comes in, reorganizing that information based on changing priorities, adapting to different audiences with different needs who are reading it. And it forces you to think holistically, sort of a chiropractic approach and view of what you're dealing with. So you see how each thing affects something else. And what's the result? Well, it can speed your career journey, which you'll see in a moment. It can save you a lot of time. It's sort of like the carpenter. If you measure twice and cut once, it, in the long run, saves a lot of time and cuts costs. You can expect it forces that KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid, creates much greater clarity of the information, and reduces mistakes, missing something. For the reader, well, it fits how they read. Because in the business world, people are overwhelmed, and the higher up you go in the organization, they're even more overwhelmed with emails and documents and meetings and presentations. So with things that they read, here's the reality. For the most part, they scan it. And the easier it is to scan to say, is this important enough to invest my time? The more likely they're going to use it and read it. And if not, they're going to put it aside thinking they're going to get to it. And frankly, they often don't get to it. 2, it helps the reader consider it. If it's challenging to get through, they're going to set it aside for later. If it's too long, if it looks like it's laborious, if it looks like it's not going to be fun and easy to get through. Same thing you probably do with students. Then if they actually do read it, if it's a logical flow, it creates more insight. If it's clear on what the facts are and the implications are, it's more useful. Now, it's also helpful to the reader to use it myself because it allows me to review it easily with someone else. So, for example, if an employee brings me an analysis and it's in this format, I can walk into my boss's office with that set of notes. And if my boss asks questions, I can easily share what the most important parts are. It's actually more retrievable. I can find stuff more quickly that I need, whether it's a day later or maybe a week later, it's the follow-up meeting. And where did we leave off before and where we are now? And what did we agree to? And it eliminates all that. So it's a conduit, therefore, for starting the next meeting, creating that continuity so you're not wasting all the time reviewing what you already did before. And so what's the result to expect? Your stuff's going to be read more often. It's going to be understood more often. It's going to be acted on more often. So how do we learn? Well, the essence of digesting information is, in reality, learning is a complex activity. It's about information absorbing. And what's the process? Well, we get information, and how do we organize it? What's the essence? Our brain is sort of like a file cabinet, and our brain's asking, what folder do I put this in? And we're spending so much time identifying how to organize things. When we don't know how to organize things, we miss a lot of the information. That's why that exercise that we did before with the numbers, if you share people with people where sort of the files are, where to store stuff, if you make it easily organized, they're more likely to be able to focus on the content. 2, in digesting information, you understand it. Is it logical? And, that requires insight. And insight requires not only the facts, but the implications of the fact. It's the cause and the effect, right? And we did that in an exercise. We said, if you observe, if you eavesdrop on conversations, we're wired as individuals to share facts, the who, what, when, where, how, but surprisingly, we're not wired to share the implications, which is always the why, which creates the prioritization, which creates the insight. Education doesn't take place until there's insight combined with the facts. And for whatever reason, we're not wired to do that. And when we don't explain the why, trust is decreased because it doesn't generate care and respect. And understanding doesn't improve. And without understanding, action is much less likely to occur. The next stage in digesting information is we summarize it. And how do we memorize it? And in our learning process, we tend to take lots of information as facts and we summarize it into our opinions, into our assumptions. And one of the reasons we naturally wired to do that is our assumptions. That quick summary helps us not only organize information, but also it protects our self-esteem because an opinion cannot be wrong. So when we share why we did something and we've grouped it into 2 or 3 reasons of our why, most people play back why they did something or why they believe something, and they state them in summaries, opinions, and support them with facts. So what does that mean? Well, if it's an opinion, we're at a lower risk. That's why we tend to summarize it. 2, it's a lot easier to memorize by condensing things to the 2 or 3 main things and then collect the facts before. It's like the file cabinet, it's the computer in our brain. And then for information, sometimes we want to check back and refer back what was important. Makes it easy to share learning with others too. So there's 2 primary ways that people process information if you get in the psychology of learning, right? One is called the deductive learner, which is a top-down approach. Deductive learners tend to start with, say, at 30,000 feet. If they're flying at 30,000 feet, okay, that's where the schools are, or that's where the stores are, and that's where the neighborhoods are, and whatever. 30,000 feet. What's the essence? What's the conclusion? And they gradually drop down what I call an altitude until they have enough information and facts that they're comfortable with the conclusion and how they're going to use it. So in some people, I start at 30,000 feet. When I drop to 10,000 feet, I'm now comfortable with what you're recommending. And if you keep taking me further down in detail, what happens is I go from my comfort zone back into my uncomfort zone because you're complicating something beyond what a deductive learner wants. And you tend to find deductive learners, you find a lot of them in, not as an absolute, but a lot of salespeople tend to be deductive. A lot of general managers tend to be deductive. A lot of coaches tend to be deductive. It's the way their brain operates. The reverse is a bottom-up approach, an inductive learner. And you find a lot of engineers and a lot of scientists and a lot of doctors, people very precise. And they overall approach things the opposite. They want the details. They start the journey using the analogy of the airline on the tarmac. And they gradually then build up more and more information till they hit their comfort in the conclusion. What's the danger with them? Well, if it's not a logical flow, they're not going to accept the conclusion. And what's the danger with deductive learning? So, well, if you force too much information beyond their comfort zone and get too much into the detail, they go back into a discomfort zone. So what's the implication? You got to be able to communicate to both inductive and deductive thinkers. You got to fit how people actually read. They scan. Is this important? They consider. Is this going to be easier not to get through, or should I get to it later? Prioritize my impact versus my time. Is it easy to read? A logical flow so they learn. Can they use it in sharing what they've learned in the essence with other people and take action with it? Can they retrieve the information quickly if they need it later, whether it's a day later, a week later, a month later, or even a year later? And can it be a good conduit for, we discussed it a week ago, 3 weeks ago, 2 months ago, whatever, and we quickly can get back to where we left off last time and pick up from there. And the solution to all of that is this block map writing technique. So let's get at it. What is this block map writing and note-taking technique? All right. So, frankly, you're not going to be able to find it by Googling it. Why? Because I created this version as an evolution of what I have already seen. Now, what forced me to do that? Firstly, I was personally threatened. I learned the more advanced technique from the Cornell method from a company, as I shared, called information mapping. And I spent over $250,000 with those people, sending a lot of the executives who worked for me for that training. And then one day, some of the secretaries asked, hey, you're sending all these executives to learn this information mapping technique. Can you share it with us? So I created a few lunch and learns, couple hours, and got a certified letter from the lawyers representing information mapping that they were going to sue me personally. Sort of pissed me off, right? A second reason I created it was because in the industry I was in, there happened to be a lot of dyslexics as owners and key in the leadership team, construction people who often didn't do that well in school, but some of them are just brilliant people, and some of them not so brilliant. But in general, that industry has a lot more dyslexic people than most, and frankly, I'm dyslexic. And I was looking for, there's got to be a better way to help people learn better, quicker, faster, more efficient, more effective. And frankly, I saw it as an opportunity as the next advanced level, put it on steroids to create, frankly, strategic competitive advantage by helping internally employees gain insight faster, but also externally, the clients who depended on us in our value chain, distributors, retailers, contractors, and even homeowners, it helped improve insight versus our competition. We were better through this type of communication, became a major competitive advantage. And here's what I've also observed. Graduates of the courses I've taught over the last several years at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University, and at University of Indianapolis, where I've taught at all levels, especially grad school. And most of my teaching in the last 5 years has been, frankly, at NKU. And I've seen it with these students I stay in touch with lead to rapidly increased responsibilities and promotions. Frankly, I also observed it in my two sons. They were average students up through junior high school, which is when I started developing this technique and I taught it to them, but they were very average, right? My older son, Rob, having learned to apply this technique, ended up graduating #1 in his class in a significant MBA program. My younger son, Sam, it led to him not only being accepted, but doing extremely well at West Point and serving our country in the war zone in Afghanistan. And third, I observed the strategic advantage it brought, both internally in our company in improving insights and understanding and generating action, and externally with our customers. Why? Because it drives everything we've talked about in the why theory. It builds significantly more trust because it's so much easier and simpler for the user, which demonstrates care and respect. Generates a lot more insight by making a lot more clear what are the facts and implications, the why. And frankly, because it communicates what's in it for you, the experience we're going to help you avoid and gain, which drives most decisions, generated more actions. So what are some of the details? At the top of the page is first a reminder, right? Small, not bold, what this is. So as you can see in the example, this is my review of the book. It's usually got a headline, bold, the essence. All right, it's the name of the book. I know what it was about. That's what I'm dealing with here. It's got a subheadline, bold, but what's this really about? Well, the essence of the book that I wanted to remember as a trigger is, at least to me, the most important parts were, and there was more, but the 12 most important things to employees and leadership best practices. And by the way, I thought out of respect, I'd include, hey, here are the two authors. All right, so here's an example, the top of the page. So what's in the left column? Well, the left column is overall bite-sized blocks, rows of information. Keep it simple, stupid. And by the way, the more blocks, the better. The more you can break up the information into simpler bite-sized chunks, the better. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? One little bite at a time. Don't try to eat the entire elephant in big chunks. And how do you do that? Well, you might have one block row that sort of shares, in summary, where I'm going here. I'm going to cover this overall thing deals with, say, four major things. And then each row under that deals with now those four things. So you just sort of tell where you're going and then take them there. And then again, tell them where you're going, the next major thing, and then take them there, right? Each block generally has a headline on this left side. It's bold. It shares what's important, what's the story. And it generally has a subheadline, 3 to 5 words, and again, guidelines, sometimes slightly more or less. It's not bold, but it shares some context. And the result is, by just reading the left-hand column, the reader knows, what's this really about, and is this worth my time to read? So an example from the First Break All the Rules, which you'll be reading soon, right? Here's an example of 2 blocks of information among several. One, first block out of my notes. Here's the essence of this book. Great managers break conventional management wisdom. And what's the basic recipe for management success? It's engaging the hearts, minds, and leveraging the talents. Don't try to fix people. That's sort of the left column. And if I only read the left column of my notes, I quickly remember what it's all about. So if I've got several articles and books I've reviewed with these kind of notes, it can be a year since I read that book. But if I went into class and I had to give a lecture, or if one of my clients that I coach and consult with and leadership coaching, whatever, said, hey, did you read this book? I can pull out these notes, and in 2 minutes, it just all comes back to me. What's in the right column? It's the meat. It's the proof. It's the details. It connects the dots. So how? Well, you educate, facts and the implications, right? The approach is you avoid every unneeded word, because this is not English class. And it's not going to be graded on English. It's graded on how quickly, efficiently, and effectively you can get information across. Keep it short. And if in doubt, break it up. Not only break it up into more blocks, but break it up within the block. And hardly ever, ever, ever use paragraphs. Paragraphs are like this signal subconsciously that, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to really read this and spend some time and make sure I really understand it. So here's an example from, again, the book. I'm sorry, the book, not the article, the book, First Break All the Rules. And the left column in this particular section, right, which we just reviewed, the left column, what goes there, it's, hey, there's 4 best practices of leadership. And the key is to unlock potential of each employee. Well, what are the 4 elements? 1, how do you select people? Talent versus experience, right? You can teach facts, not instincts. So it says hire talent, not experience. 2, when you hire people, set expectations, but focus on the outcomes, not the how to get it done. Let them own the process, provide overall guidance and support, but let them own it. Focus on the outcomes. 3, don't try to fix people. focus on their strengths rather than trying to fix people, what most people do. And 4 is develop people. Find a fit where they can most likely succeed and add value. All right. And you'll see that when you read the book. The point is very simple. I know from the left side, the story, and the right side gives me the more details. All right. So what are some of the tricks of the trade? 1, when there's a sequence of things, describe it as a sequence. It's easy to remember. Hey, there's 7 steps. Here's step 1. Here's step 2, step 3, step 4. Hey, there's 8 things to remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And under 5, there's 4 things that go under 5. A, B, C, D. When you categorize things, when you sequence things, it's more likely to be remembered, understood. Words, the minimal, the least amount possible. Remember, it's not English. They'll understand more with less. Use bold type to show what's really important. Why? Because after they read it, or after you prepare it, that 1 or 2 key words in bold type becomes a trigger for recall. And when you go back to prepare, you often don't need to read the detail behind it. The trigger word reminds you immediately, so it saves a lot of time. Use quotes for emphasis. Things in quotes say, this is special, take notice. Don't just use quotes for someone said it. Guide the brain to make it easily to digest. What I mean, you'll see in a lot of my writing, I'll have a statement and then ... or I'll have a colon. Why? That tells the brain subconsciously, pause for a second, digest that for a second, and then continue. So ... and colons, and actually especially question marks, tell the brain to digest this for a second, which helps insight and education. Use visuals, diagrams, photos, whenever possible. And when you do use visuals, always put a caption on it that describes the visual, so you know for absolute sure why you put it there. Always goes there, what and why, what you just showed them. What's the conclusion of the visual? Don't assume they know the conclusion. And as a style, keep it informal, just like sort of write as if you communicate like you were in the living room. It reinforces trust and it engages people better. So let's try it in action, all right? So let's look at a 200 plus page book using this block map writing technique and summarizing those notes in 3 pages. And it's one of your assignments. It's first break all the rules. It's over 200 pages. This was done by a student. That's a 3-page comprehensive summary. I want you to notice it's easy to scan. It's easy to follow the logic. And if you had to go back to it later, it's easy to find what you want. And if a professor asked in class, for example, about this book, or I was reviewing it with a client who I'm coaching, I can quickly find specific areas to refer them back to. And if I read this book and didn't go back to it for 2 years, within 2 or 3 minutes, I can remember what the entire book was about and what the essence was. This is page 1. This is page 2. And this is page 3. Notice the left column, I know the whole story. The right column, I get the details. There's no paragraphs, it's just the essential words. And in bold are the trigger concepts, so that when I go back later, I don't have to reread everything. So here's an experiment to try. Pretend your friend read a chapter in a book and took these notes from the book. 2, you asked them for the notes because you didn't have time to read the chapter. 3, but in class, the professor asked you, well, what was that chapter about? So 4, you use those friends' notes to share your chapter review, pretending sort of in the living room, so don't read it word for word. Use the notes to sort of discuss it casually. And then ask yourself, how easy was that? So for example, well, it was a chapter on business vision and mission. And, the basically vision statements are, what's our desire? What do we want to become? And some of the guidelines is, do this first in your planning process, keep it short, generally one sentence ideally. And, it's not really about the profit you're going to make because that's not that motivational. Mission statements, on the other hand, are what business are we in, right? So the guidelines is declare what's our reason for being? What's the foundation? It ought to include the priorities and the key strategies and the key plans and the key assignments and, and revisit, assured that it currently reflects actually what we're doing now. And why is it so important? Because it helps create that emotional bond that, that just from the participation in the process of developing the mission. Now, the overall importance, why is it important? Why do you want to bother doing this? Well, one, creates more understanding and insight by employees. Two, helps you prioritize. So, the SWOT factors, the strengths, weaknesses internally, and the opportunities, threats externally are more easily identified. It helps you allocate resources and decision-making better. It helps you structure to make sure you're organized to deliver that. Clearly, communication direction is improved by having it. It shares the purpose and the worth and the sense of belonging of everybody. Performance of the organization gets improved and is synergy. Now, I'm not going to keep going, but notice I actually haven't read this in over 4 years. This was something that was from a class I did at Butler University. And I pulled it out just to demonstrate this thing and try it yourself. You can see with this set of notes, even if you weren't the one who wrote them, you could use them effectively. Here's another example out of my career, all right? The situation was we had just made a $1 billion acquisition of another company. I had to quickly educate over 200 of their salespeople to blend them in and merge them in and help them understand what the combined organization is all about. So I had to share the strategies and who we are. The initial draft by all the team members around the corporation was over 100 pages, and that wasn't going to be effective. And I boiled it down to 3 pages. And this is page 1. What's our company all about? Well, it's the best and safest choice. Quality people can trust since 1886. And what we do, we decommoditize, and that's our path of our future. And it's working. And I talk about GF at its core. We're the largest. We went from number 5 to number 1. We're growing rapidly. We're dominant in our category. Number 2 and number 3 aren't even as big as it. And it went through who we are and what our strategic approach was and what our major programs were and how we went about it. And here's where you can find the major things for our customers, the tools for success. Boiled down to 3 pages, and they got it quickly, and they found their purpose quickly, and they were excited about it quickly. And notice, it's all block writing. I got this letter from a prior student, Professor Harris. This came a couple years after a student had graduated. I'm not sure you remember me, but I was a student of yours. This happened to be at University of Indianapolis. And I've completed my Master of Science Management and just found out 30 minutes ago, before writing this note, I got promoted. And I attributed the success to using block writing as an analyst. When I first sent my manager a summary, she pulled me aside and told me how impressed she was with my work. And she encouraged me to apply to the other team lead positions. And man, it worked out well, just from block writing. And as much as I hated block writing back then, this was not a fan when we started. I appreciate it now. And I've got lots of letters and examples like this. It helps careers. So your takeaway, Hey, can block mapping help you? For some of you, yes. For all of you, no. I'm not trying to be the preacher up here trying to make you all believers, but for some of you, I think this can have a significant effect in your career. Some applications, summarizing your reading and reviewing it, both in class and in business. 2, taking notes in meetings of the discussions and the action steps and being able to bring them to the next meeting so it's more efficient and effective and not all the things forgotten and half the work forgotten and not moving forwards. It's great for documenting processes and creating clarity of understandings of expectations of people and how to get things done for continuous improvement. And it's great for providing updates of what you're working on and the insights being actionable. And what are the results? Well, it improves your comprehension and your memory. It is a little more difficult at first putting it together for all the reasons we said. It's sort of measuring twice, but cutting it once, like the carpet. It'll save you time overall, help you avoid hassles, improve your efficiency and improve effectiveness in the teams with you. But back to the why theory. It generates trust. It improves understanding. And as a result, a lot more positive action occurs. I hope you found this helpful. Let me know if you've got any questions, comments, or concerns. And again, this is not required in the team project, but if you choose to try to apply it, you get a little bit of extra credit. If you need any specific additional help, please let me know. And the reason I want to help you with this, if you're highly interested, because I've seen the effect it can have on some people's lives. And that's, at this point in my life, why I'm here and why I'm teaching. It's such a privilege to have a small effect on the journey of just a few people's lives. So let me know how it can help you. Thanks, everybody.